Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I welcome you to the series History, Science and Faith in Islam. In this session, we will continue with the life and times of Akbar the Great Mughal. Akbar was the first Muslim emperor to extend to the Hindus the same status as that accorded to the Christians and the Jews from the beginning of the Islamic period. This was a bold move, one that met resistance from the more conservative ulama. Akbar married a Rajput princess and allowed her to practice her faith within his palace, just as earlier Turkish sultans had married Byzantine Christian princesses and allowed them to practice Christianity within their quarters. Hindus were treated on par with the people of the book. The jizya was abolished, and Hindus became generals and commanders in the army, as well as governors and diwans in the empire. By his personal example, the emperor sought to build families with the Hindus, thus extending the reach of Islam to the Vedic civilization. The fourth great Mughal, Jahangir, was a product of Rajput-Mughal intermarriage. Akbar's legacy stayed with the empire well into the years of his decline. Some of the princes became scholars of Sanskrit, as well as Persian and Arabic. Prince Dara Shikoh, eldest son of Shah Jahan, translated the Indian classic Mahabharata into Persian. Akbar's eclectic mind was always searching for spiritual answers. In the splendid city of Fatehpur Sikri, which he founded, he built a house of worship called Ibadat Khana. Here, he invited scholars and listened to their discourse on matters of religion and ethics. Initial sittings with Muslim scholars broke up in disputes and arguments. On one occasion, two of his most prominent courtiers, Sheikh Abdul Nabi and Sheikh Maghdumul Mulk, went after each other with such vehemence that the emperor himself had to intervene. Disillusioned, Akbar opened up the discourse to men of other faiths. Hindu priests expounded the philosophy of karma. Jains presented the doctrine of ahimsa. Parsis joined in to discuss the tenets of the ancient faith. In 1580, he sent word to the Portuguese governor of Goa that he would like to hear from Christian priests. The governor, sensing an historic opportunity to convert the great Mughal and win over Asia to his faith, promptly dispatched 3 Jesuit priests. The 3 brought with them paintings of Jesus and Mary, which the emperor himself helped carry to the quarters of the priests. Akbar listened to the Christians, as he had listened to Muslims, Shias and Sunni alike, Hindus, Jains, Parsis, benefiting from the many insights offered by the learned men of all religions. But at no point during these years did the emperor renounce his faith in Islam or embrace another faith. He remained a Muslim throughout his life and set an example of open-mindedness, which had seldom been matched among monarchs of any faith. The disappointed Jesuits returned to Goa in 1582. The house of Timur, from which the great Mughals claimed their descent, was deeply spiritual. Timur himself, despite his cruel and destructive conquests, was a religious man who honored Sufi sheikhs, living and the dead. Babur's spiritual disposition showed up in the manner in which he died. Humayun himself made it a point to visit the tombs of Sufi sheikhs during his wanderings in Persia. This characteristic showed up in Akbar also. The history of the Chishtiya order of Ajmer is closely interwoven with the history of the Delhi Sultanate. Emperor Alauddin who died in 1316, treated the Chishtiya sheikhs with respect and had prospered. Emperor Muhammad bin Tughlaq treated them harshly and had paid a heavy political price. Akbar was a devoted follower of Sheikh Muinuddin Chishti, who lived between 1142 and 1236 in Ajmer, whose tomb he visited on foot every year. When his wife Jodha Bai was pregnant with Jahangir, he sent her under a Rajput escort to live in the Zawiya of Sheikh Salim Chishti, who was the living sheikh of the Chishtiya order. It was at the hermitage of the sheikh that Prince Jahangir was born, and the emperor named him Salim in honor of the sheikh, and fondly used to refer to him as Sheikhu. It was also in honor of the sheikh that Akbar raised the majestic city of Fatehpur Sikri near his hermitage. Both Akbar and Jahangir held the sheikh and his memory in the highest esteem, and his name was taken in court circles with the greatest respect. India belonged to the Sufis, and the emperor was no exception. Islam in the subcontinent of the 16th century was the Islam of the Sufis, and Akbar was its finest product. He did not claim divinity as had the Fatimid Khalifa al-Hakim, who passed away in 1021, nor did he claim divine attributes as had Shah Ismail, who died 1524, founder of the Safavid dynasty. Akbar did not even claim that he was a saint, but he was the king emperor of Hindustan, an unlettered prince with the intellect of a giant, a deeply spiritual man with an unending search for transcendence in religion. Akbar was the first and perhaps the only Muslim emperor to reach out as far as he did to embrace peoples of non-Semitic religions. Previous contacts with Christians and Jews were on the basis of coexistence. In the Abbasid as well as Ottoman realms, Christians and Jews were accepted as people of the book and were given autonomy to govern their own internal affairs. Akbar went one step beyond coexistence. He tried co-union with the Hindus. This was the first and only such attempt by a Muslim monarch of any significance. This single fact accords Akbar a preeminent position among the great monarchs of the world. Deen-e-Ilahi, a compendium of ethical standards, which Akbar had extracted from the religious discourses he attended, and based largely upon Nasiruddin al-Tusi's exposition of akhlaq, was misunderstood as a new religion. These standards are to be found in Ayn-e-Akbari, a collection of court edicts compiled by Abul Fazl. Some of the misunderstandings arose as a result of poor translations from Persian, and some from a lack of understanding of tasawwuf and of the doctrinal basis of akhlaq. For instance, Akbar considered his relations with his followers as that of a pir murid, Sufi sheikh and his disciple, not that of a prophet follower. The emperor did not seek converts, and there is every indication that he discouraged people from becoming his murids and tolerated open dissent with his practices. Even Raja Man Singh had dubious feelings about the emperor wearing a holy mantle. To those who did not accept him as their peer, the emperor gave a medallion on which was inscribed, Allahu Akbar, God is greater. When a courtier reminded him that the emblem could be misunderstood to mean that Akbar had claimed divinity, the emperor replied that shirk, meaning association of partners with God, had not even entered his thoughts. Indeed, the emperor continued to perform congregational prayers whenever he was on military campaigns. On his return from Kabul in 1580, he is known to have performed Jumu'ah prayers in Peshawar. On occasions, he insisted on giving the khutbah, a practice in keeping with the example of the early companions of the Prophet, but long since taken over by professional Khazis. While it is true that he patronized the construction of 4 large Chaitanya temples at Mathura in 1573, it is also true that the emperor himself built great mosques. The magnificent mosque in the courtyard of Sheikh Salim Chishti in Fatehpur Sikri is a monument to Akbar's dedication to Islam. On the exoteric plane, Akbar's experimentation with ethics comes across as religious innovation. But at the esoteric plane, his initiatives are in consonance with the spirituality of the age. By the 16th century, the Chishtiya Sufi order had found a welcome home on Indian soil. Vaishnava Hinduism of Mathura was attracting more devotees amongst Hindus. Guru Nanak, who lived between 1468 and 1539, had just founded a new religion, Sikhism, to bring Islam and Hinduism closer together. Each group pushed its point of view aggressively. Akbar, as the emperor, was aware of these movements. His discussions in the Ibadat Khana with leading exponents of various religions had given him an insight into each one. Akbar's religious initiatives produce whirlpools of intellectual activity in India. The Orthodox were convinced that the purity of faith was in peril. Some of the practices that the ulama found objectionable included the emperor offering his darshan, which in Hindustani means to appear, to show oneself to his subjects from a balcony at sunrise, a practice borrowed from the Persians. Inscription of Allahu Akbar medallions that were offered to his murids, those who sought spiritual guidance from him, and even his marriages to Hindu ladies. They considered these practices to be inconsistent with their view of Islam. The response of the Orthodox ulama and their interactions with the emperors determined the shape of Indian history, and ultimately that of global Islamic history. Ironically, the most determined resistance came from a Sufi order, the Naqshbandi Sufi order, that grew roots in Hindustan during the reign of Akbar. Khwaja Baqi Billah, one of the Naqshbandi sheikhs, was born in Kabul in 1563, from where he migrated first to Lahore and then to Delhi. Dissatisfied with some of the practices introduced into the court, he interacted with court elements that sought to replace Akbar. It was at the instigation of these dissidents that Akbar's brother Mirza Hakim invaded Lahore in 1581, an event that brought the great Mughal to Lahore and resulted in his conquest of Kashmir, Sindh, Balochistan, and southern Afghanistan. Khwaja Baqi Billah passed away in 1603. It was his disciple, Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi, who lived between 1564 and 1624, who had a profound impact on Islamic thought, not just in India, Pakistan, but also in the entire Islamic world. Indeed, he is a pivotal figure in world history. Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi was born into a family of Hanafi scholars and was initiated into the Naqshbandi order at Delhi in 1599. Through his lectures, his writings, and his contacts with Emperor Jahangir, he deeply influenced social and political developments in India. Sheikh Ahmad was opposed to any form of innovation in religion and taught that religion should follow the simplicity and rigor of the rightly guided Khalifas. He was anguished at disrespect shown to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as had happened when the Jesuit priests from Goa presented their religion at the imperial court in Fatehpur Sikri. He was distraught at the aggressiveness with which non-Muslims propagated their faiths while the Orthodox Muslims were constrained in implementing their practices. He wrote to the leading Mughal courtiers as well as to the leading ulama of the age in India and in the Ottoman Empire, expounding his views on orthodoxy. These writings, Maktubat-e-Iman Rabbani, have been translated into Turkish, Farsi, and Urdu, and have influenced Muslims the world over. Later historians termed his movement Mujaddadiyya. Sheikh Ahmad elaborated and consolidated the principles of Wahdat al-Shahada as a counterpoint to extreme interpretations of Wahdat al-Wujud. So preeminent is the position of Sheikh Ahmad Sarhindi among the ulama that he is referred to as Mujaddid al-Alf-Thani, meaning renewer of the second millennium. The history of the subcontinent shows that Akbar's attempts did not succeed. Muslim India remained ambivalent about his initiatives. Sunni Islam embraced the orthodoxy of Aurangzeb. The Shias maintained their exclusiveness. The Hindus and the Muslims both took aggressive positions. The Sikhs, who started out bridging the gap between Muslims and Hindus, ended up fighting them both. The partition of the subcontinent in 1947 and its gory aftermath, in which Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs indulged in sustained orgies of mutual slaughter, was a political and social acknowledgement of this failure. It is instructive to compare the achievements of Emperor Akbar with those of Queen Elizabeth I of England. The two were contemporaries. Akbar ruled from 1556 to 1605, while Elizabeth I ruled from 1559 to 1603. Both had inherited kingdoms that were weak and divided. When Akbar ascended the throne, his control hardly extended beyond Delhi and Agra. When he died in 1603, the empire embraced more than 1 million square miles and had become one of the most powerful empires in the world. When Elizabeth ascended the English throne, England was a marginal state in Europe and the object of intrigue by Spain and France. Scotland was at war with England. Elizabeth consolidated the United Kingdom, defeated the Spanish Armada, and took England out of the orbit of Rome. When she died in 1603, England was the most powerful state in Western Europe. Akbar's dominions were far more extensive than those of Elizabeth and had a population 10 times that of England. But Akbar was a king-emperor on the mighty landmass of South Asia. He made no attempt to build a strong navy. The material for building ships was available in Bengal as well as in Gujarat. The technology was available to him from Ottoman Turks and from the Chinese. But as strong as they were on land, they surrendered the Indian Ocean to the Europeans. During the height of Akbar's power, pilgrims to Mecca and traders to East Africa had to have their papers stamped by the Portuguese for safe conduct. In the year 1600, even while Akbar was consolidating his empire and Hindustan was headed towards a period of dazzling prosperity, the East India Company was granted a charter by Elizabeth I. 200 years later, when history hurled England and India into a fateful embrace, it was the lapse of the great Mughals to build a navy and control the Indian Ocean that made the difference. And the company triumphed over the Rajas and Nawabs who had inherited the empire. The system of mansabs instituted by Akbar, while it served the emperor during his period of expansion, proved to be a drag on the treasury when decay set in. In the 20th century, it proved to be an impediment to modernization in both India and Pakistan. Third, the empire lagged behind Europe in the diffusion of knowledge and technology. The printing press, which was introduced into Europe in 1415, made possible the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. The printing press was not introduced into the Mughal territories until the 18th century. Technology and innovation suffered, while wealth and power became the focus of court life. India did not produce a Newton or Galileo or Kepler. Fourth, the Mughals and the Ottomans and the Safavids knew far less about the Europeans than the Europeans knew about them. Indian explorers did not travel through Europe to learn about the Firangis, who were increasingly active on their shores. Indian exclusiveness, Hindu and Muslim alike, acted as a barrier to correct information and knowledge about these traders from faraway lands. So, when the decisive confrontation came, faulty intelligence did the Indians in, while the Europeans took full advantage of the knowledge they had about Indian court intrigues and societal failures. Akbar's greatest contribution to Islamic history was his extension of the framework for interaction between Muslims and non-Muslims. Until his reign, sultans and ulamas alike had divided the world into two neat little compartments, Darul Islam and Darul Harb. Darul Islam was where the sultans reigned, and the non-Muslims paid jizya in return for military protection as dhimmis. Darul Harb was where the non-Muslims ruled, and conflicts between Muslims and non-Muslims were unavoidable. Religious obligations that were binding on all believers in Darul Islam were not necessarily binding in Darul Harb. Akbar, the great Mughal, added a third dimension to this bipolar world. This was the dimension of co-union, in which the definition of people of the book received the maximum latitude, the meaning of Islam as Darul Fitra, meaning pristine and natural faith of all humans, was implemented, and Islam extended its loving hand to all humankind. Few grasped the vision of the great Mughal. They were looking at the rainbow through a prism that allowed a single wavelength of light. The colors of the rainbow were lost to them. Akbar's social, political, and religious activism fell by the wayside, and history lost track of the lofty horizons shown by the great Mughal. It chose instead narrow and sinuous alleys. This concludes our session on Akbar the Great Mughal and the consolidation of the Mughal Empire. In the next session, inshallah, we'll cover the naval battle of Lepanto, which is a critical event in global history. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Mm-hmm.